My grandmother was a time-traveling woman. Under her influence, not only did my grandfather not take a concubine, but even my uncle and father only had one wife. But after my grandfather returned from the northern frontier, he brought back a girl about my age. He brought her to my grandmother and said, "For 40 years I've been yours alone, and I've fulfilled my promise. Today I'm taking Yenna as my concubine, whether you agree or not." My uncle and father both agreed. My aunt and mother, who should have been by my grandmother's side, meekly bowed their heads and advised her to be tolerant and magnanimous. Later, my uncle followed my grandfather's example and took a concubine, leading to his wife and children being separated and unrest in the backyard. The eldest princess went to the palace to sue my grandfather for his poor management of the household, and the family was thrown into chaos. Thinking of my grandmother, the family stumbled into her courtyard. The dressing table was empty, the comb mirror untouched, and a gentle breeze filled the courtyard, but that beautiful figure was nowhere to be seen. Grandfather collapsed. With trembling hands, he lifted a letter written in sharp handwriting from the desk. "No more worries here, Dongue." 1. When I rushed to the front hall, everyone else in the family had arrived. Grandmother sat on a sandalwood chair in the main seat, with a woman in plain clothes kneeling below. The girl raised her head, tears streaming down her dark hair, looking slightly disheveled. Her exposed neck was white, slender, and shimmering with a lustrous luster. She was incredibly handsome, about my age. Grandfather, whom I hadn't seen in 3 months, paced back and forth restlessly. From time to time, he glanced at grandmother, his eyes no longer filled with the tenderness they once held. The others stood with their heads bowed, even their breathing deliberately subdued. Unsure of what was happening, I quietly leaned closer behind my mother. As I stood still, I heard my grandmother's leisurely voice. "Everyone's here. Say what you just said again in front of the children." My grandfather stiffened for a moment, then shook his sleeves in annoyance. "What? You think calling them all here will force me to change my words?" He suddenly raised his voice, shaking the dust off the beams. "What's wrong with saying it again? I'm going to take Yenna as my concubine, whether you agree or not." Startled, I jerked my head up. My grandfather had remained steadfast for 40 years for my grandmother. Could such deep love change? My grandfather was the Duke of Jingua. Not only was he a man of both civil and military talents, he was also incredibly handsome. As a young man, he was renowned throughout the capital. His figure, atop a silver saddle and a white horse, captivated countless noble ladies. But he chose my grandmother. My grandmother didn't have a distinguished family background, nor was she considered stunningly beautiful, even remotely magnanimous and virtuous enough to be a mistress of the household. She wanted to be alone for the rest of her life. My grandfather agreed, ignoring the family's objections, and married her off in a sedan chair carried by 8 men. He said, "A single scoop of water from a vast expanse of water is enough." When I was young, I often saw my grandfather tuck my grandmother's embroidered handkerchief close to his body. Whenever he drank with his colleagues in the camp, he would pull it out to show off. "Look at these twin lotus flowers, embroidered by my wife herself." 2. My mother was frail when I was born, and it was my grandmother who took me home to raise me. My grandmother was truly extraordinary. While other young ladies were confined to their boudoirs, playing the zither and painting, she took me jogging in the courtyard. While other ladies were reciting the instructions for women, she taught me the 5 animal exercises. She said that health is the foundation of revolution, and nothing can replace it. Although I didn't quite understand it then, my cousins were panting with every step, easily catching a cold. I was as strong as a calf, climbing the cherry tree in my grandmother's yard effortlessly. When I was 12, the slender waist of a Chu palace suddenly became popular in Beijing. My mother found a pearl-studded corset from somewhere and excitedly wanted to put it on me. That was the first time I saw my grandmother angry. She pointed at my mother, her fingers trembling, and cursed her for being vulgar, harmful, and futile. "To please a man, you strangle a healthy woman until she's sick." Are women's lives so worthless? She tore the priceless corset apart, sending pearls clattering to the ground. Today, I declare this: anyone who dares to touch my body will have their legs broken. It was then that I realized my grandmother wasn't from our world. She came from a place called the modern age. I often heard her muttering strange words like equality and freedom to herself, sometimes staring blankly into space. She said her mission had long been completed, and she stayed here for grandfather's sake. They all looked down on me. Your grandfather, fearing I'd be wronged, sacrificed all his military achievements to secure an imperial decree granting marriage. Grandmother's eyes sparkled as she spoke. That year, I had a difficult labor giving birth to your father. Your grandfather knelt outside the delivery room all night. The child was born, but he didn't even look at me. He held me and cried louder than the child. In the hall, my grandfather's roar suddenly brought me back to reality. You always said you'd leave if I treated you badly. I've doted on you for 40 years. What else could you possibly be dissatisfied with? From now on, stop spreading those shocking statements. Just be a good wife and mother to me. So my grandfather knew my life story. I saw tears welling in my grandmother's eyes. I tried to speak, but my mother grabbed her wrist. She pulled me behind her and smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Mother-in-law, what man in the capital doesn't have a concubine? Father has only had you by his side for so many years, which shows how much he loves you. Now, father has rarely found someone to cheer him up. Please be magnanimous and agree. You are the Duke's wife, no one can surpass you. 3. I stared at my mother in confusion. Back then, my maternal grandparents carefully selected a concubine for my mother, valuing the love between my grandparents. My father also promised that he would never take a concubine. My mother was clearly the beneficiary, so why would she persuade my grandmother to be tolerant? My father's approving gaze fell on my mother, and she actually lowered her head and twisted her handkerchief, 2 blushes on her cheeks, like a young girl in her 20s. I clenched my fists and looked at my uncle, hoping he would intervene on my grandmother's behalf. My uncle was my grandmother's first child, and she devoted all her energy to him. My uncle, who had won the top spot in the imperial examination at the age of 20, was highly valued by the emperor for his unconventional thinking. Now, before he even reached 40, rumors were already circulating that he was about to enter the cabinet. But this duke's son, who had been taught the Chusi by his grandmother since childhood, was now stroking the dragon pattern on his jade belt. Mother, you have to consider us too. I'm about to enter the cabinet, but you know what my colleagues are saying behind my back. They say the women in our He family are the masters of the household, and that the hens crow at dawn without distinguishing between important and unimportant things. My full expectations were shattered by my uncle's forbearing voice. What a cabinet appointment! My grandmother interrupted my uncle with a sharp shout, her gaze piercing my aunt like a knife. Do you think so too? My aunt was born into a royal family, personally appointed Princess Yunhua by the emperor. In her youth, she was free and unrestrained, a rare exception in the capital. At my grandmother's question, my aunt's pearl hairpin trembled violently. This princess, who had once crushed the imperial crown of a minister's son on horseback, was now frozen in place by a single look from her husband. She had fallen in love with my uncle at first sight, and having only given birth to my cousin for years, she felt deeply insecure about her position. No matter how much my grandmother tried to persuade her, having a daughter is a blessing, my aunt always felt guilty. My aunt glanced at my uncle, a little helpless, then turned and whispered, "Mother-in-law, taking a concubine is really not a big deal." Even though my father had 8 concubines and dozens of illegitimate children, he still loved my mother and doted on me even more. Otherwise, what other woman could be as carefree as I am? My grandmother glanced at the crowd with disappointment. So you all think taking a concubine is right? So all these years I've been the laughingstock. She stood up to leave, and I rushed over and hugged her arm. Grandma, you did nothing wrong. Minna thinks you're right. 4. Grandfather still insisted on taking a concubine. The servants hung large red lanterns high, illuminating the entire Duke's mansion. That night, the noise from the east wing spread far and wide. A maid whispered in my ear. He called for water 3 times, but it was all just a show. It was obvious who he was doing it for. But grandfather is truly old, he couldn't even hold out once. If grandmother knew, she'd probably laugh her head off. I'm afraid she'd be even more upset. The next morning, Auntie came to serve tea, her slender waist supported. Her slow, every 3-step pause was truly contrived. If you didn't know, you'd think grandfather was so brave last night. Alas, she didn't even make it through grandmother's courtyard. She fell sorrowfully into grandfather's arms, like a lovable little animal. My lord, the madam won't tolerate me, so please send me back. It's just a piece of white silk, why bother causing dissension between you and the madam? Grandfather's furious voice echoed outside the courtyard. You offer her tea, showing respect. She's just a merchant's daughter, yet she keeps spouting nonsense about otherworldly experiences. She's so ungrateful, just send her back to that other world. I'm the head of the household, not Shinrua. As if remembering something, he sneered again. It's been 40 years. If she could go back, she would have done so long ago. Since she won't accept the tea, then let her stay in her own courtyard and don't come out. Grandfather ordered the servants. No one is allowed to let her out. This was the first time my grandmother was confined to her room. I curled up on the chaise longue, watching the tea smoke gradually condense into frost. Grandmother closed the carved window lattice, and the moonlight cast shadows of varying depths on her face. Munna, if grandmother left, would you hate her? So grandmother could leave. I opened my mouth, but when my eyes met grandmother's sorrow, I bit back any words to keep her. Grandmother is an eagle in the sky, not a bird in a cage. I can't selfishly keep her. She deserves freedom. Grandfather's revenge was swift and brutal. He paraded through the streets with concubine Yi, riding on a pleasure boat and enjoying the dragon boat races together, letting the entire capital watch as the mistress of the household was trampled upon. The housekeeper's power was tossed to my aunt like a rag, and the key to the storeroom jingled crisply at concubine Ye's waist. Without my favor, I wonder how long she can hold on. He was forcing grandmother to compromise. It was ridiculous that he assumed grandmother was alone and helpless, and had no choice but to stay with him, unaware that she was already planning her departure. 5. All of this is yours from now on. Grandmother gently stroked the top of my head. She handed over to me, without reservation, the private treasury she had cultivated throughout her life and the confidence she had carefully cultivated. Grandmother came from a merchant family and faced considerable disdain when she married into the Duke's mansion. But who could have imagined that the Duke's mansion's daily necessities were now entirely supported by the shop she owned? Grandfather must have forgotten that he chose the wrong side in the succession struggle during the previous emperor's reign. It was grandmother who sold her dowry overnight and used her connections to secure the He family's title. After that, grandmother single-handedly opened 3 trade routes, organized a fleet to sail across the oceans, and traded silk and porcelain for countless rare treasures. Housekeeper power. Ha! Who cares? A hint of contempt crossed grandmother's lips. Just take what I'm giving you. Anyone who dares to steal, Grandpa Jiang will chop off their paws. Grandpa Jiang was grandmother's chief steward and the head of her guards. Grandmother always joked about him as captain of the He family security. The title belonged to the He family, but in reality, he was loyal only to grandmother. From now on, he would be loyal only to me. With these things, even if you don't find the right man, you can still live a comfortable and respectable life. Grandmother suddenly turned serious and pinched my cheek. But remember, don't be like those ladies who fight tooth and nail for a man. Love sick, they're only fit to pick wild vegetables. I nodded vigorously, my throat tightening as I forced back the tears. If a child raised by grandmother were to become a love-struck child, wouldn't that be a betrayal of all her years of teachings? Don't tell anyone about my departure yet. Let the bullets fly for a while. She left a letter on the table. Although I couldn't wait to see my grandfather's reaction upon learning of my grandmother's departure, my grandmother said we had to wait, so we waited. My grandmother pulled a set of clothes from the bottom of the box. The style was strange, something I had never seen before. After putting it on, she danced gracefully in the yard, her knee-length skirt swaying like a fishtail, her high heels accentuating her slender legs. A beam of moonlight descended, enveloping my grandmother. She waved at me, her smile brighter than the moonlight. The beam vanished, and so did my grandmother. The yard was silent, as if everything had just been an illusion, save for the rustling sound of petals falling from the crabapple tree. Madame By gently took me in her arms. She was my grandmother's maid, and she had watched me grow up. Young lady, this is a great blessing, the nanny's voice choked with sobs. You should be happy. 6. I drifted off to sleep in my grandmother's room, when I heard my grandfather's voice from outside the courtyard. The morning dew had not yet dried, and his voice carried a hint of grievance I had never heard before. Rua, I actually dreamed you were gone last night. Oh. I know you blame me for taking a concubine, but you should also think about me. We've been together for 40 years, supporting each other through thick and thin, and treating each other with respect. You're a grandmother now, why are you still being so petty? He suddenly raised his voice, a hint of annoyance, but it seemed as if he was speaking to himself. I held my breath, hiding behind the window frame, and peered through the crack. My grandfather was still in his court robes, clearly having returned from court. He stood outside the courtyard gate, his eyes fixed on the closed door, his fingers unconsciously stroking the jade pendant around his waist, the one my grandmother had given him on his birthday the previous year. The courtyard was completely silent. Grandfather waited for a long moment, his expression gradually darkening. I've already given you a way out, his voice suddenly hardened. Since you won't give me up, even if you beg me on your knees, I won't set foot here again. He flicked his sleeves and turned, but after a few steps, he stopped again. He glanced back, his lips moved, but ultimately, he said nothing and strode away. From that day on, grandfather lived up to his words and never entered grandmother's courtyard. The Queen's 1,000 Years Day was approaching, but grandmother still hadn't shown up, leaving everyone in the palace feeling uneasy. At my father's instruction, my mother took me with her to complain to my aunt. Everyone outside is laughing at the Duke's mansion. Why don't we go and talk mother down? Mother grumbled softly, you're already old, why are you so clueless? Aunt seemed preoccupied. She pruned her beloved peony with scissors, even removing the unopened buds, oblivious to the situation. Mother patted her gently. Sister-in-law, what's wrong with you? You look so distracted. Aunt snapped back to her senses, a forced smile playing on her lips. It's just spring fatigue, a bit of lethargy. It's summer already, how could there be any spring fatigue? The panic in her eyes was clear to me, and mother knew it, but she didn't question it, instead turning the conversation back to grandmother. My aunt nodded slightly, her voice so soft it seemed to float on the wind. Mother, what you're doing is truly inappropriate. You should go sit in her room. I was just about to stop her when my aunt's maid stumbled in. Madam, the crown prince, he brought a woman home and said, he wanted to take her as a concubine. 7. The family gathered in the front hall again, and there was still a woman kneeling at the bottom. I was a little dazed. This scene could happen again. Only now the protagonist was my uncle. Guang looked at the kneeling woman with pity, repeatedly trying to help her to her feet. Yue and I share a deep connection. Even though she comes from a humble background, she is like the moonlight in my heart. This Yue, brought into the mansion by my uncle, was a famous tofu beauty on West Street, widowed for 6 years and with a 5-year-old son. My aunt had long since collapsed, leaning against her mother, sobbing softly. The princess, a daughter of a wealthy family, couldn't even utter a word of rebuttal. I guess this is what my grandmother called lovesickness. My grandfather's brow furrowed, his face gloomy enough to drip water. But he had set the precedent of taking a concubine, so he couldn't slap himself in the face now. But letting a widow with a child into the mansion, and a vendor who was always in the spotlight, this was a slap in the face of the Duke's mansion. Grandfather suppressed his anger and turned to the servant beside him, asking, "Where's the madam? Why hasn't she come yet?" He hoped that grandmother would intervene. Out of filial piety, Uncle had to consider the matter carefully. Clearly sensing grandfather's intentions, Uncle argued, "Father, when you took a concubine, I wholeheartedly supported it and even asked Yunhua to persuade mother. Now that I want a concubine myself, father shouldn't have stopped me." At this, Auntie suddenly looked up, tears welling in her eyes. "I turned a blind eye to your affairs outside, but how could you bring her back home? When you asked me to marry you, you clearly promised to be together forever." Uncle's brows furrowed, furious at Auntie's unreasonable behavior. "You're the eldest daughter-in-law of the Duke's family, how could you be so inconsiderate? I'm about to enter the palace. If someone finds out I'm keeping a mistress, what will my future hold? When my father took a concubine, you advised my mother so sensibly. I thought you were a virtuous woman, but I never expected." My aunt's body swayed, her face ashen. I lowered my eyes, feeling the irony. Things change. You never know the pain unless you're stabbed. My grandfather's breath was trapped in his chest, unable to swallow or exhale. In the end, he could only vent his anger on the servants. "You bastards! I told you to invite the madam. Where's the madam?" 2 incense sticks had passed before footsteps were heard outside the hall. Nanny Bai walked in, her sleeves rolled up. She exchanged glances with me, her expression calm. "Young lady, have this old servant pass on a message. From now on, she will not interfere in the affairs of the Duke's mansion. As the head of the household, the Duke can handle matters on his own." 8. My uncle kept repeating, "Father took a concubine back then," his sharp words leaving my grandfather speechless. My aunt was simply weeping in grief, and no one else stood up to stop her like my grandmother had. In the end, my uncle got his wish and settled the child in the mansion. However, my grandfather refused to allow Tofu Shisher's child into the mansion. "If you insist on taking that child in, the throne of Crown Prince will be given to your younger brother." Under Tofu Shisher's resentful gaze, my uncle nodded in agreement. This decision, however, would have numerous consequences. Tofu Shisher kept clamoring to see her son, and my uncle, driven to despair, had to ask my aunt to give her a pass. From then on, she ran out of the mansion every day, returning late at night. She often took her young son with her to bid farewell outside the mansion gate. The 5-year-old child's voice was clear and clear. "Mother, I'm not allowed to enter the Duke's mansion, so I won't go in. Don't worry, if the masters inside see us, they'll blame you." The mother and child hugged each other and cried, attracting many passers-by. Isn't the Duke's mansion bullying? How can such a young child take care of himself? That woman has been selling tofu to support her child for 5 years, and now not only has he been forcibly taken into the mansion, but she's also being torn apart from her own flesh and blood. What a sin! I heard that Prince He is going to join the cabinet. Is such a heartless person worthy of an official position? At first, the Duke's mansion paid little attention to these rumors. Until one day, the Emperor slammed a stack of impeachment memorials from the censors in front of my uncle. My uncle knelt in the imperial study, his court robes soaked with sweat, and kowtowed profusely. "I will strictly discipline my family." But the imperial decree regarding his appointment to the cabinet was never mentioned again. My aunt even went to her father to plead with him, but was scolded back. She hugged her cousin, who had returned home, and felt a wave of remorse. "If I had known this would happen, I would never have tried to persuade your grandmother to be magnanimous and tolerant. If your grandfather hadn't taken a concubine, your grandmother wouldn't have been so disheartened, and your father wouldn't have." Everyone assumed my uncle would dismiss the concubine. Unexpectedly, after a long conversation with my grandfather in the study, he took the child into the Duke's mansion. My aunt began to walk towards my grandmother's courtyard, standing there for an hour. She cried bitterly, hoping that my grandmother would intervene and drive my uncle's concubine away. But every time she returned, she was disappointed. My mother also ran into my yard and sighed. Minna, your grandmother loves you the most. Even your two brothers don't have the face you deserve. She looked toward my grandmother's yard and gave me a push. Go and persuade your grandmother. If this continues, the He family's century-long reputation will be ruined. 9. Of course I didn't go. My grandmother was long gone, so why waste my breath? Mother, please focus on father, lest he become like your uncle. My mother was also afraid that her husband would bring home a concubine, who was not up to the standard, and would cause unrest in the family. She disrobed her maidservant and shoved her into my father's room. But she didn't know that the maidservant had long been in love with my second brother, and was just waiting for him to marry. But what did this have to do with me? I was engrossed in my grandmother's manuscript. It was a blueprint for a sailing ship, 45 meters long and 20 meters wide, with 9 masts and 12 sails, capable of carrying 1,000 people. How magnificent such a ship must be. I'll have Grandpa Jiang find craftsmen and spare no expense to build this vessel. Perhaps one day, when the walls of the capital can no longer hold me captive, this ship will carry me to freedom far away. When that happens, I'll be the witness of the magnificent sea and sky that grandmother never witnessed. Because of my uncle's matter, grandfather, with all his dignity, went to grandmother's courtyard and spoke many words to the closed door, but no one responded. As if finally realizing he couldn't control grandmother, he turned his attention to me. Minna has reached marriage age, and it's time for a marriage. Since you won't take care of it, then I, your grandfather, will. He entered the palace to meet the emperor and detailed my misbehavior and disobedience. He requested the strictest maid to take over. I heard that this maid could tame even the most stubborn maid in the palace. This was clearly a case of venting his anger. He took out all his resentment towards grandmother on me. He thought I would go to grandmother and cry, and then she would come to him for help. What a joke. Just a teaching nanny. The nanny asked me to copy the women's rules and instructions 10 times. I smiled and handed her the pen and ink. Since you're here to teach me, you should lead by example. Why don't you copy it together? She asked me to kneel for an hour with a bowl full of water on my head. I knelt steadily, but she insisted on dragging her along. The royal dignity cannot be violated. If you can't do it, what right do you have to teach me? She raised the ruler to hit me, but Nanny Bai and Grandpa Jiang immediately stood in front of me. Nanny Bai said coldly, "My daughter is a precious child. If you hurt her, how can you bear the consequences?" Even when grandfather personally came to pressure them, they refused to budge. After several rounds of fighting, the elderly nanny finally gave in and resigned from my grandfather. You shouldn't have been raised by your grandmother. What's the point of reading all that? It's teaching you to be lawless. The husband is the head of the wife, and women should stay home, supporting their husbands and raising their children. I immediately retorted. Not allowing women to study is simply because you're afraid we'll broaden our horizons and no longer be enslaved and oppressed by you. You're just afraid women will rebel and develop a sense of independence. My grandfather was furious and immediately arranged a good marriage for me. 10. Prince Pingyan is of royal blood and values rules above all else. He's the perfect person to tame your unruly nature. This prince was the eldest princess's only son. He already had 2 concubines and countless mistresses, and he was also a confidant of the courtesan at Suixinlu. Rumors of this had spread all over town. Only then did I understand that my grandfather was determined to challenge my grandmother. And I became a victim of his display of authority. My mother rushed over, grabbed my hand, and complained. If you had just listened to your grandfather, wouldn't it have been better? You've been so stubborn, and it's only made you suffer. She then changed the subject, talking about my grandmother's private collection. Your grandmother loved you, and she'll probably leave all her things to you. Just take half with you when you get married, and leave the rest to your brothers. I sneered inwardly. Bitter? Not at all. Marrying anyone doesn't matter. Besides, with the confidence my grandmother left me, I'm not afraid even if I marry into a dangerous situation. As for my mother, she had long planned to leave all her dowry to my two brothers, and now she's thinking about the things my grandmother gave me. How could I, her daughter who hadn't been with her since childhood, ever catch her eye? I smiled sweetly. Mother, you're right. What a shame. If my uncle hadn't insisted on taking a concubine, I wouldn't have missed my chance to enter the palace. Mother, please leave me alone and go persuade my eldest brother and his wife first. I heard that my eldest sister-in-law originally wanted my uncle to help find a job for her younger brother, but now she's angry with my eldest brother and wants to go back to her parents' home. Seeing I wouldn't budge, my mother twisted my arm in anger. She said, "Behave well," and hurried away. 11. When my mother came to my yard again to ask for money, I immediately retreated to the mountain temple to pray. She was furious. What an ungrateful bastard. I raised her with so much hardship, and this is how she repays me. A passing madam by smiled benevolently. Second madam, what's wrong with that? Miss Minna grew up under my young lady's wing. If there's any repayment to be made, it should be to my young lady. Even my uncle and father had to bow and greet Madam by. My mother could only wring her handkerchief in her hands and walk away dejected. I didn't know what was going on in the mansion. I was happily preparing to go to the mountain temple to see the peach blossoms. The carriage had barely left the city gate when it suddenly stopped. I was trying to put a piece of candied fruit into my mouth when the jolt nearly choked me. I held onto the side of the carriage and coughed twice before I could catch my breath. I parted the curtain and saw Prince Pingyan Li Rong standing in the street, clad in a crimson brocade robe. The sash around his waist was adorned with western gems, dazzling in the sunlight. He looked like a peacock with its tail spread. In his arms nestled a beautiful woman in a pink shirt, Zhao Roshua, the most popular courtesan at Zuishan Tower. She was clutching an embroidered handkerchief over her red lips, her golden hairpins tinkling as she giggled. Before I could say anything, a delicate voice reached me. Where are you going, sister? The prince heard you were passing by and rushed over to see you. Is he trying to show off? I slowly picked up another candied fruit and popped it into my mouth. Miss Zhao, be careful with your words. I don't remember anyone like you in our duke's mansion. Before I could finish my sentence, Li Rong became displeased. He Dongman, I'm here to tell some people not to think they can act like a princess just because they're engaged. He suddenly pulled Zhao Roshua over and bit her earlobe right in front of me. Remember, Roshua is the one dear to my heart. The delicate fingers pretended to resist, but then slid up Li Rong's chest. Prince, sister, miss, he is watching. She feigned panic and yanked the mandarin duck sachet from Li Rong's waist. Oh, this is the first token of love I ever gave you, Prince, and you've been wearing it. Of course, since it's from you, I wear it every day. I couldn't help but chuckle. This was even more exciting than the opera's most popular play, Romance of the West Chamber. Seeing that I wasn't annoyed but was actually enjoying the show, they both turned and stared at me. I felt a little embarrassed by the four eyes staring at me so intently. I tilted my head. Have you two finished singing? Then please make way. 12. If an ordinary woman were humiliated in public by her fiancé, she would have burst into tears, overcome with shame and anger. But my reaction clearly surprised Li Rong. He froze in his place, seemingly unable to believe his ears, and demanded sharply, "Did you hear everything I just said?" I nodded and lowered the curtain. My grandmother once said a glance at someone unworthy is a waste of time. If the prince has no further instructions, please leave. Zhao Roshua, upon seeing this, immediately tugged at Li Rong's sleeve, tears welling up in her eyes. Your Highness, miss, he is so cold. Is she looking down on me? After all, the Duke's family is of noble rank. If I really became sisters with her, I'm afraid. Beyond the curtain, a sudden silence fell. Suddenly, there was a clang, and Li Rong drew his sword and slashed open the car door. He Dongman. Why are you so self-righteous? Wood chips flew, and the sword's edge grazed my temple, severing a strand of my hair, which fluttered and fell onto the brocade cushion. Li Rong clearly hadn't expected to cut my hair. He paused, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He had only meant to scare me, but now, frightened by the chill in my gaze, he was incoherent. This prince didn't mean to do that. If you marry into the mansion and behave yourself, I won't bother you. I looked at him coldly, a sudden sense of absurdity welling up in my heart. Do I really want to marry a man like this? Li Rong's mouth opened and closed, and I couldn't hear a word. I asked the carriage driver, Grandpa Jiang. I remember the shaft was covered in newly sheet iron. Miss Manner, it's made of fine steel, very sturdy. Then what are you waiting for? I said, my voice cold. Run over it. Grandpa Jiang didn't care whether it was a prince or a princess in front of him. Upon hearing my command, he whipped the horses to spur them on. The carriage suddenly rushed forward. I leaned back against the cushions, humming a ballad my grandmother had taught me. We are all trying our best to survive. Before the song ended, the carriage jolted violently, and the neighing of horses and the screams of women could be heard from outside. I opened the curtain again and saw Li Rong and Zhao Roshue sprawled on the ground, their faces filled with fear. A hint of sneer curled my lips. I'm trying so hard, how come you're still alive? 13. Of course, I didn't make it to the mountain temple. The people from the princess's mansion arrived quickly, practically forcing me through the vermilion lacquered gate. A noble woman sat at the head of the table, clad in a crimson-purple palace dress, her brows piercing. Upon seeing me, she slammed her teacup down on the table, spilling a few drops of scalding tea. He Dongman. Her voice was as cold as ice. Do you acknowledge your guilt? I stood with my eyes lowered, my voice calm. Princess, please understand. It was the prince who blocked the road with a sword, and my driver couldn't get out of the way. Couldn't get out of the way. A truly incapable of getting out of the way. She sneered, and the teacup shattered. Do you think I'm a fool? I looked up at her, neither humble nor arrogant. If I had truly meant to, he wouldn't have just had a broken leg. The princess flew into a rage, slamming the table and rising. How dare you? Watching her fury, I felt a sense of relief. Make a scene, the bigger the better, even before the emperor's presence. I spoke gently to her. Princess, calm down. Your son has someone he loves. Why not cancel the engagement? It's a win-win for both of us. You took a fancy to my grandmother's set of Yongla blue and white porcelain cups last time. I'll get them right away. The princess narrowed her eyes, her tone cold. Cancel the engagement. You wish. It seems blue and white porcelain can't impress her. It's not feasible for her to ask for a breakup. 14. After returning to the mansion, as soon as the news of my urgent summons by the princess spread, Nanny Bai and her men burst in with a mighty force. Miss Muna is frail. How can she withstand such torture? She instructed the maids to carry in the brocade couch and the fumigation basket. In less than half an hour, the room was filled with enticing aromas. The 8 treasures chicken was stewed to tender bone and meat, the crystal pork elbow was sliced as thin as a cicada's wing, and the crab stuffed with oranges was still covered in golden fat. I bit my silver spoon and chuckled. This was probably even more elaborate than my grandfather's birthday banquet. Mammy, I said, stroking the round my stomach throbbed on the brocade couch. If you keep eating like this, you won't be able to get out of the door. Madame Bai caressed my head lovingly and prepared a few more pieces of cheese for me. Don't starve to death tonight. When I was woken in the middle of the night, there were still crumbs of cheese on my lips. The front hall was brightly lit. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I was met with angry glares from the family. My grandfather told me to kneel. You know, the eldest princess came to the palace to accuse me of lax household management, and I knelt in the imperial study for an hour. His Majesty even dismissed your father from his post, and told him to reflect on his poor parenting. My grandfather's concubine, now Madame Lu, gently stroked my grandfather's back and softly advised, "Don't let your anger get to you, Duke." She turned and smiled at me. "Hasn't Madame come yet? It's already this hour, and you're still angry. You've caused such a terrible disaster, I can't let the entire Duke's mansion be implicated by you." The others chimed in, and my mother even called me a jinx. "Your eldest brother's promotion documents have just been submitted to the Ministry of Personnel, and your second brother is joining the Jinwu Guard. If their futures are hindered, I'll break your legs." I was originally kneeling. After all, I had a share in the splendor of the Duke's mansion. But now, all they cared about was their own future, leaving no trace of family affection. I slowly stood up, my gaze sweeping across the room full of family members. "So, what do you want?" Grandfather slammed the teacup at my feet, and I dodged slightly, avoiding the shattered porcelain. He didn't expect me to dare to dodge, and he got even angrier. "Go find your grandmother, and have her transfer all the shops in the East Market to the princess's mansion. Then, have her take you to the gate and kowtow and confess your sins." I shook my head, firmly refusing. "No." 15. The night was as dark as ink. Grandfather was furious. He grabbed my wrist with such force that it nearly broke my bones. "Go. Go find your grandmother. We must have an explanation for what happened today." At his command, the entire Duke's mansion erupted in an uproar. My uncle led the way, lantern in hand, while my father followed behind with a gloomy expression. My mother grumbled about my two brothers' health, paying no attention to anything else. Concubine Lu, accompanied by a few trusted maids, looked like she was enjoying the show. Only my aunt didn't come. I heard she'd been sickened 2 days earlier by my uncle's concubine. A mighty procession of people marched through the corridor, startling the night birds and sending them scattering. This time, Nanny Bai didn't stop them. She had quietly stood behind me, fingers tucked into her sleeves, a sneer in her eyes. My grandfather kicked open my grandmother's door, the Nanma panel slamming against the wall with a thud. "Shenrua, get out." The only response was the night breeze blowing through the hallway. The cool moonlight filtered through the window lattice, illuminating the silent room. The servants frantically lit the oil lamps, the flickering flames gradually illuminating the inner chamber. The rosewood dressing table, the jade incense burner, the screen embroidered with the 3 friends of winter. Everything was exactly as it had been when my grandmother was still alive. Even the gilded phoenix hairpin on the dressing table lay still, as if its owner had only temporarily departed. Grandfather picked up the hairpin and stared at it again and again, a hint of panic creeping into his eyes. This hairpin had been specially crafted by a craftsman from Jiangnan, and grandmother never left it behind. Madame Lu suddenly squeezed to the front and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Madam, the Duke has come to see you in person." She deliberately emphasized the word "in person." There's no such thing as an overnight grudge between husband and wife. Just bow your head and admit your mistake. As she spoke, tears began to flow again. "If Madam really can't tolerate me, Duke, please let me go. I'll pack my things now and won't be an eyesore to Madam." This trick had always worked. Whenever she acted like this, grandfather would fly into a rage, accusing grandmother of being intolerant. But tonight, grandfather seemed deaf, completely ignoring her cries. He kept calling out like a madman, "Shenrua, Rua." Madame Lu's face froze and her nails, painted red, dug into her palms. She took 2 steps back unwillingly, meeting the half-smiles between me and Nanny Bai, and hurriedly forced out 2 more tears. The oil lamp crackled and shattered. Grandfather suddenly rushed into the inner room like a madman, lifting the quilt, pushing aside boxes and crates, even checking under the bed. Seeing this, my uncle and father also panicked and began calling out, "Mother! Mother, are you there?" I watched them coldly as they whirled around like headless flies, turning over even the secret compartment behind the shrine. Finally, grandfather stood in the middle of the hall, panting heavily, his hair disheveled, his robes stained with dust. Where was the dignity of a duke? Grandfather finally remembered me and turned to look at me. 16. He stumbled toward me, his voice hoarse as if it had been ground by sand and stone. "Where's she? Where's your grandmother? Where's she gone?" I smiled at grandfather, but his words cut like a knife. "Didn't grandmother say she'd leave if you took a concubine? She's gone, back to her own world." Grandfather's body swayed twice, his face pale as paper. "Gone? How could she leave me?" He let go of my sleeve, his lips trembling violently. "We've been married for 40 years. How could she bear to leave? How could she bear to leave?" He suddenly clutched his chest, the returning crane pattern on his robe wrinkling. I almost laughed out loud. 40 years of marital love. Then who had insisted on carrying concubine Lou into the mansion in front of so many guests? Who was it that confined grandmother to her house, yet allowed that woman to wear bright red in the mansion? Now they're questioning grandmother for disregarding her feelings. As grandmother had said, men in this world are best at double standards. The letter grandmother had placed on the table fell to the floor, its handwriting etched through the paper. "No more worries here, Dongue." Grandfather's body hunched over, as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. Unable to support himself any longer, he slumped to the floor, clutching the letter. Everyone was shocked by grandmother's passing, and no one stepped forward to help. My eldest brother, standing at the back of the crowd, suddenly complained angrily. "It's just a concubine, isn't it? Grandmother, you're so pretentious. What's wrong with a little injustice?" My grandfather looked at my eldest brother blankly. "Do you think she deserves it?" I stared at my eldest brother. In the moonlight, the eldest grandson of the Duke's family had a look of self-righteousness on his face. This is the future of inheriting the title and the Duke's mansion. I suddenly remembered the bowl of hangover soup my grandmother had personally prepared for him last New Year's Eve. He had accepted it on his knees. "They're just women. They're supposed to live by relying on us men. Their duty is to support their husbands and raise their children. These grievances are what they deserve." I lowered my eyes, feeling the irony. In their eyes, women shouldn't have their own thoughts, just silently give. Any resistance is treason, a violation of moral principles. How ridiculous. Thankfully, my grandmother taught me that women can be as independent as pine trees, and as sharp as swords. I will never be a puppet at the mercy of others. So, I really did wrong her. My grandfather raised his head, and let out a shrill wail into the pitch-black night sky. The cry was like that of a wounded beast, mingling with the cry of a night owl, and the pain of regret. Everyone suddenly woke up, scrambling to help him. Only my mother leaned over to my ear and whispered, "Is your grandmother really gone?" Her voice was extremely low, yet her excitement couldn't be concealed. "So has your grandmother's private treasury been given to you? That's great. Quickly give me 100,000 taels of silver. Your eldest brother's promotion needs help, and your second brother's betrothal gifts are still missing." I slowly turned to look at her. My eyes must have looked terrifying in the moonlight. She took several steps back, her voice abruptly terminating. Just as I was in a state of disarray, a maid suddenly rushed in. "No, this is bad. The crown prince's wife is bleeding." No one had expected the child brought by my uncle's concubine to suddenly become violent. Taking advantage of the absence of everyone, he suddenly pushed my aunt from behind. Caught off guard, my aunt tumbled down the high stone steps. "This is revenge for my mother." The child sneered from the steps, his eyes dark and sinister beyond a 5-year-old's. It's all because of you, my mother cries every day. He held a grudge against his aunt for the disagreement between his mother and his aunt that day, and he resorted to such a cruel method to seek justice for his mother. By the time everyone arrived, his aunt's face was as pale as paper, and a large, dark red smear spread beneath her. Child, save my child. My aunt had taken countless bitter medicines and endured countless hardships for this pregnancy, practically begging for her life to be saved. The palace doctor, sighing and shaking his head, sent his uncle into a rage. You evil creature! I shouldn't have brought you into the palace. He grabbed the child by the collar and slapped him to the ground. Just as he was about to raise his hand, concubine Yu, whom he had so longed to take into his family, rushed over like a madman and cradled the child in her arms. She cried quite beautifully. Prince, Xiaoka is only 5. What does a 5-year-old know? She turned to my aunt and distorted the truth. Maybe the crown princess was going to do something to Xiaoka, and that's why he's rebelling. My uncle's hanging hand suddenly froze, and he turned to question his dying wife. What did you really do to a 5-year-old? My aunt's vacant eyes suddenly widened, her throat gurgling as she vomited blood and fainted. Instantly, the courtyard was in turmoil again. When my aunt awoke, she saw no one but her maid to fetch me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at the once dazzling pearl of the capital, now a withered sight. Minna, I was wrong. She held my hand, not a single tear shed from her dry eyes. They have no heart. He's not worthy of my love at all. I gently grasped her trembling hand and whispered. My cousin's husband was sent to Shu a few days ago, and I went with him. Nothing can hold you back anymore. My aunt's eyes lit up, and I seemed to see the flamboyant and bright princess of yesteryear back again. 18. After I left, my aunt immediately entered the palace. As dusk fell, the gilded imperial edict of divorce landed like thunder at the gates of the duke's mansion. My uncle held the edict in disbelief, shaking like a leaf in the wind. He suddenly leaped up and swept all the teacups off the table. You haven't even left a child to carry on the family line, and I haven't divorced you yet, but she. He blocked the door to the storeroom, preventing anyone from taking away my aunt's dowry. She's just throwing a tantrum. For all these years, she's always been obedient and submissive to me. I'll go find her now. She'll definitely ask His Majesty to revoke the decree. The eunuch delivering the decree shook the whisk from his shoulders and rolled his eyes at my uncle. Your Highness, save your energy. The princess has already left the capital, and it's uncertain whether she'll ever return. This was also the advice I gave my aunt. Rather than enduring rumors in the capital, why not reunite with my cousin in Shu? I heard my cousin was pregnant and needed family by her side. My uncle shook his head frantically, refusing to believe it. He ran to find my grandfather, hoping he'd come to the palace and help him bring his wife back. After searching for a long time, he finally found my grandfather, drunk, in my grandmother's courtyard. The once dignified head of the family was now huddled under the albizia tree in the courtyard. My uncle shook his shoulders, trying to sober him up. Father, she's gone. She doesn't want me anymore. My grandfather, dazed, lifted the wine jug and took another sip, his voice slurring. Yes, she's gone. She doesn't want me anymore. She's gone. My grandfather burped, spraying his uncle in the face. It's been 40 years. I thought she had nowhere to go. My uncle ran off to find his cousin again. He knew his only daughter would win his wife back. But after knocking on the door for a long time, only a hard-of-hearing old servant answered. These days, my uncle has been busy arranging concubines, entertaining colleagues, and professing his loyalty to the emperor. Now he learned that his daughter had been exiled with her son-in-law. He returned to the duke's mansion, devastated. He happened to see concubine Yu packing her bags and stealthily heading towards the corner gate, dragging her son along. 19. The wails of my uncle beating concubine Yu had barely died away when my mother and father entered my courtyard. My father, acting like the head of the family, ordered me to hand over all of grandmother's belongings. You'll be marrying into the Duke's mansion someday. 36 treasuries are a respectable dowry. The rest should be used to support your brother's career. Seeing my sneer, he suddenly raised his hand, but stopped abruptly mid-air, his forehead veins bulging. Don't be so ungrateful as your grandmother and aunt, who have thrown the family into chaos over a concubine. Learn from your mother, she's virtuous and gracious, the epitome of a proper mistress. My mother sat down next to me and softly counseled me. The Duke's mansion is your support. If your brother has a promising future, you'll have the confidence to stay in the Duke's mansion. Even the princess will look up to you. One of them played the good cop, the other the bad cop. One used threats, the other bribes. They're simply trying to squeeze out everything my grandmother left me. Alas, they're doomed to be disappointed. I won't leave them a penny. However, I certainly won't confront them head-on. I'll let them down so I can act more easily. Feigning persuasion, I stammered, grandmother did give me all her private treasury, but. My father, in a fit of rage, swung his sleeve and knocked over the teacup on the table. Don't be so slow. I've been to your grandmother's treasury, it's empty. Where are the silver and the land deeds? His eyes gleamed with greed. And those rare calligraphy and paintings? The old grand tutor is about to celebrate her 80th birthday and needs precious treasures. They've even planned what to do with my grandmother's things. I bit my lip as if finally giving in. Give me 80 sets of dowry or I'll never tell you. If I gave in easily, it would only arouse their suspicion. My mother flew into a rage, digging her sharp nails into my arm. You bitch, you ungrateful bastard. 80 trolleys. You don't deserve it. A look of understanding flashed in my father's eyes. He reached out to stop my mother and winked at her. Fine, if you're willing to ask, I'll even give her a few more trolleys. A delighted look crossed my face as I pulled a yellowed map from the bottom of my dressing table and tapped it lightly. This is a copper mine. My grandmother's caravan discovered it. Before I finished my words, my father snatched it away, dashing out the door like he'd found a treasure, heading for his study. My mother glanced at me and hurriedly followed my father. After the footsteps faded, Nanny Bai quietly entered by lifting the curtain. My lady, the boat is ready. We tested it half a month ago, and everything is fine. I glanced towards my father's study and curled my lips. The copper mine was, of course, real. It's just that my aunt had already placed the same map on the imperial desk when she entered the palace. I just wonder if His Majesty would be willing to share a share with my father. 20. Escorted by Nanny Bai and Grandpa Jiang, I left the capital and arrived in Dengzhou. The salty sea breeze, swirling with moisture, blew against my face. I stood on the dock, gazing at the massive ship gently rocking with the waves. It resembled a dormant beast, the eyes of the vermilion bird carved on its prow glowing dark red in the setting sun, as if it had been waiting for a long time. Nanny Bai read me the letter sent by galloping horse from the capital. My grandfather sold concubine Lu and then frantically took in concubines, each of whom bore a resemblance to my grandmother. When he was drunk, he would embrace his concubines and cry out passionately, "Rua, my Rua, are you back? I knew you wouldn't leave me." Was he deliberately seeking a woman who resembled my grandmother out of remembrance of her, or to humiliate her? I'm just trying to erase my guilt, but I'm afraid there's also some inexplicable resentment. It's truly disgusting. It's over. I asked Nanny Bai to continue reading. After reading 2 lines, Nanny Bai burst into laughter. The Duke is old. When the young lady was alive, he personally took care of his food and drink. Now that she's gone, he's been drinking and reveling without restraint, and he suffered a stroke on the concubine's couch. Retribution came faster than expected. It wasn't just my grandfather who was in trouble. At a flower viewing banquet hosted by my mother, my second brother and my father's new concubine, Chuantao, were caught having sex in public. When they were dragged out of the house by my father, Chuantao's mandarin duck belly band was still hanging on my second brother's belt. Chuantao is mine. My second brother knocked my father to the ground. She's 2 years younger than my fourth sister. How could you, an old beast, have the heart to do that to her? My father was furious and ordered the family rules to be brought, breaking my second brother's leg. My father had seized his own son's concubine. The incident caused widespread uproar, turning the Duke's mansion into the laughingstock of the capital. Imperial censors' impeachment memorials flew into the palace like snowflakes. My eldest brother was implicated and dismissed from office. On the day my sister-in-law threw down a divorce letter and rode away without looking back. My eldest brother rode in pursuit, but fell off his horse, his skull crushed by the horse's hooves. My mother couldn't accept the loss of her two beloved sons, one dead and the other disabled. She went mad, sometimes in a trance, sometimes lucid. She flailed around the courtyard, waving her arms, one saying her eldest son would inherit the title, the next saying her second son was second to none. Taking advantage of the chaos in the Duke's mansion, my uncle's concubine, Yu, fled with her sons, leaving behind only a few empty boxes of golden nanma chests. My uncle, enraged, ordered his men to pursue them, but my father stopped them. As long as the copper mine is mined, the Duke's mansion will remain standing. They led their men to the mine, only to discover that the royal guards had already surrounded the entire mountain. In the hall, the emperor angrily rebuked my uncle and father, threatening to strip the Duke's title and exile the brothers to Lingnan. My uncle and father were terrified, remembering my engagement with the Prince of Pingyan. The Prince of Pingyan contracted syphilis from a courtesan, and is now incapacitated. Isn't that even better? Marrying He Dongman now would show sincerity. The princess will surely plead with His Majesty for her son's sake. Alas, they'll never find me again. The huge sails rustled. Nanny Bai draped a fox fur coat over me. Grandpa Jiang waved at me from the mast. Miss, the wind is favorable. I stroked the jade bracelet left by my grandmother around my wrist, speaking firmly. Set sail.